There is a war happening right now, but don't be fooled. It's not a war you can see with your eyes. It's not fought with weapons, armies, or explosions. It's a silent war, invisible, a battle that takes place in the heart, the mind, and the soul. And if you haven't realized this yet, you might already be affected. Evil doesn't present itself in an obvious way. It sneaks in subtly, twisting values, weakening bonds, dividing families, and destroying lives. Have you ever felt this around you? People who were once full of light now seem cold, indifferent. Bonds that used to be strong, corroding without explanation. None of this is by chance. There are forces working behind the scenes, influences that don't want to be noticed, but they operate all the time, leading people away from the truth. And the worst part? Many ignore it. Many refuse to see. Many have already fallen into this trap without realizing it. But how does this influence manifest? You know, it doesn't happen overnight. It comes slowly, creeping in like a fog that covers everything before you even notice. And the first sign of it? Have you ever noticed how some people just change? They used to be joyful, fair, loving, but suddenly something about them feels different. They become cold, distant. The words that were once filled with truth are now filled with indifference, or even lies. You feel like something inside them is lost, but you can't explain why. This doesn't happen by accident. One of the enemy's greatest strategies is subtle transformation. He doesn't announce his presence. He slowly molds a person, changing their perceptions, their desires, their priorities. And the first symptom of this? The loss of spiritual sensitivity. Someone who once sought truth now rejects it. Someone who once valued goodness now mocks it and what comes next, the justification of sin. Small acts of disobedience that once seemed unthinkable are now seen as normal. Lies are told effortlessly. Betrayals are rationalized. Evil becomes just. A personal choice. And just like that, without realizing it, many start walking a path that leads them away from the light and closer to darkness. But is this just human behavior, or is there something bigger behind these changes? Because if there are changes, if there's a pattern, then there's a plan behind it. Someone is moving the pieces of this game, and that someone knows exactly what they're doing. Because if there's a strategy, then there's a strategist. And now, we need to talk about him. As you can see, the enemy's greatest trick has always been deception. He doesn't appear as many imagine, horns, a pitchfork, and flaming eyes. If he did, everyone would reject him. No, he hides, he disguises himself, and he does it so subtly that many don't realize they're falling right into his plan, the plan of deception. He doesn't impose evil directly. He inserts half-truths. He twists concepts. He makes what is wrong seem acceptable and what is right seem oppressive. And little by little, he leads people away from what is just. But that's not all, because he has another powerful weapon: division. He separates, he breaks, he destroys. Have you noticed how small disagreements quickly turn into major conflicts? How families that were once united now barely speak. How friends who were inseparable now treat each other as enemies. This is no coincidence. This is a strategy. Divide. To weaken, separate, to conquer. Because when we're isolated, we become easy prey. And that's exactly what he wants. And once all of this is set in motion, he moves on to his final blow: the creation of doubt. He starts planting questions in people's minds. Is this really wrong? Do the principles I was taught really make sense? What if everything I believed in was just an illusion? And just like that, the ground starts to crumble. What was once firm becomes uncertain. What was once truth now seems relative. And when doubt takes hold, oh, The door is wide open for something much darker to enter. Division begins to take its toll. What happens next? The signs appear, but not everyone sees them. Many prefer to ignore them. But what if I told you? I've seen this happen. There was an English friend I had known for 28 years, a man with a good heart, fair, honest. He always talked about doing what was right. He helped others without expecting anything in return. One of those people you look at and just know he has a special glow. But one day, something changed. At first, it was just small things, sharp comments here and there, sudden irritation over topics that never used to bother him. Then, he started distancing himself. He no longer wanted to talk about life, purpose, or what really mattered. When someone said something he didn't want to hear, he reacted with arrogance. And then came what scared me the most, his contempt for the sacred. The man who used to pray now mocked those who believed. The man who used to speak of kindness now defended everything he once condemned. That's when I realized he wasn't the same person anymore. And it wasn't just a change in behavior. It was a change in essence, a complete reversal of values. Suddenly, everything that used to be wrong was now acceptable. Everything that used to be condemned was now normal. And what happened next? He cut off good influences. He started avoiding those who could help him. He distanced himself from friends who gave him wise counsel. He isolated himself in his own bubble, and whenever someone tried to bring him back, he responded with hostility. Truth bothered him. The sacred irritated him. Faith became a joke. This wasn't a phase. This wasn't just a shift in opinion. This was something much deeper. And I ask you, have you seen this happen to someone? Or maybe, are you seeing this happen to yourself? Because if these signs are already present, the influence is already at work. And if nothing is done, the next step will be the complete destruction of the bonds that hold people together. I always like to give this example. Have you ever seen a fire start? At first, it's just a spark, a tiny flicker, insignificant. But then, it finds something flammable. It spreads, it grows, until before anyone realizes it's too late. There's no control anymore. The fire consumes everything, and that's exactly what happens when the spirit of division takes hold. The enemy doesn't come in tearing everything down at once. He plants the seed and waits. He whispers in one person's ear, then in another's, and the rest happens on its own. A disagreement that could have been resolved becomes a war of egos. A sideways glance turns into a reason to sever ties. A moment of silence becomes an unforgivable offense. And suddenly, those who were supposed to protect each other turn against each other. Division begins in the heart. Before a single word is spoken, resentment has already settled in. Pride has already been inflated. And then, when no one expects it, everything crumbles. Friends who promised to stand together forever become strangers. Siblings who grew up side by side become rivals. Parents and children who were once inseparable now can barely look at each other. And the worst part? No one realizes that this wasn't just chance. It was a plan, a meticulous plan designed to separate, to weaken, to destroy. Because the enemy knows if he isolates, he controls, and then comes the final blow, the inability to forgive. The heart hardens, anger becomes permanent, time passes, and no one even remembers how it all began. Only the emptiness remains. And now I ask you, how many relationships in your life have already been burned by this fire? And how many can still be saved before it's too late? Because one thing is certain, the fire of division does not extinguish itself. And when everything is already destroyed, when division has consumed relationships, families, friendships, what's left? Emptiness, coldness, darkness. But there's something even worse, because after the destruction comes the complete rejection of truth. At first, the truth is uncomfortable. Then it's irritating, but eventually it becomes unbearable, and that's when something terrifying happens. The truth begins to be hated, and it's not just simple disdain. It's not mere disinterest. It's a deep, consuming hatred, a hatred so strong that everything that was once respected is now mocked. Before, principles were solid. Now they're a joke. Before, wisdom was sought after. Now, it's rejected, and the one who dares to speak the truth becomes the enemy. Have you noticed this? How those who try to warn others are silenced? How those who stand up for what is right are attacked? How, today, morality is ridiculed while deception is applauded? This is not a mistake. This is not an accident. This is a system designed to eliminate any chance of turning back. The false sense of freedom. Because when someone rejects the truth, they think they're freeing themselves. But in reality, they're becoming even more enslaved. They're handing over their mind, their soul, and their will to something that controls them without them even realizing it. And with every passing day, with every new wrong decision, the heart hardens even more, the conscience becomes numb, the soul drifts further from the light. Until a moment comes when there's no turning back, the person isn't just lost, they no longer want to be found, and when someone rejects the truth, when there's no longer room for light, what comes next? The emptiness doesn't stay empty for long. Something has to fill it. And that's when darkness becomes attractive. At first, it's just curiosity, a song here, a movie there, a conversation about topics that once felt uncomfortable, but now seem fascinating. And little by little, without realizing it, darkness becomes comfortable. The shadows start to seem intriguing. Before there were boundaries, now there are none, and what was once avoided is now desired. A fascination with chaos. Violence starts to seem normal. Immorality becomes entertainment. The suffering of others no longer sparks empathy. And then, something deeper happens. The soul starts to crave destruction. Heavy films, music filled with dark messages, environments that once triggered fear, now bring excitement. And the influence keeps growing stronger, until the person no longer desires what is pure, no longer tolerates what is good, no longer feels comfortable around what once brought them peace. And why? Because now the sacred is disturbing. The Bible that was once respected now provokes contempt. Prayer that once brought peace now sparks anger. The name of God that once brought comfort now causes irritation. And at this moment, the transformation is complete. The person who once had light has now embraced the darkness, not because they were forced to, but because they chose this path. Now that you understand how this influence takes hold, now that you've seen how it corrodes, destroys, and consumes, enough standing still. It's time to resist. It's time to fight. But understand, this fight is not physical. It's not about empty arguments. It's not about endless debates. It's not about anger or impulsiveness. This is a spiritual battle, and if you don't know how to fight it, you'll lose before you even begin. Step 1. Strengthen yourself, and that starts with a decision. Do not give in. The enemy works through small compromises. He wants you to open just a tiny crack, because he knows that over time, that crack will become a wide-open door. Do not give him space. If something inside you feels off, don't ignore it. If a voice in your conscience warns you, don't silence it. Discernment is your first weapon. If you can't see what's happening, you'll just be another pawn in this game. Step 2. The truth is your sword. What defeats lies? Truth. What destroys manipulation? Exposing reality. And it begins the moment you choose not to conform to deception. Not accepting what is destructive just because everyone else does. Not staying silent in the face of what is wrong, but be careful. Truth must be spoken with firmness, but also with wisdom, because someone who speaks the truth without love might be serving the enemy without realizing it. Step 3. Intercede for those who have fallen, because many won't be able to escape on their own. Many are already trapped without knowing it. Many have lost the ability to recognize their own destruction, and if no one fights for them, they will sink even deeper. That means you cannot give up. You cannot grow weary. You cannot abandon those who can still be saved. Prayer is not a passive act. It is a direct attack against everything trying to dominate and imprison, and believe me, darkness retreats in the presence of light, but only if that light stays lit. This battle is not easy, it's not quick, and it won't be without scars. But in the end, victory always belongs to those who refuse to surrender. The power of love and unity, above all the chaos, beyond the shadows, trying to consume everything, there is a force that can never be defeated, the love of God. I'm not talking about weak, fleeting human love. I'm not talking about empty words or temporary feelings. I'm talking about a love that existed before time, a love that holds the universe together, a love that gives life to what is dead, that heals what no one else can heal. I'm talking about a love that tears through the sky like thunder, that descends like fire, that burns within the soul until every trace of darkness is cast out. This love is the very essence of God. And that's why the enemy fears it. Because he can manipulate minds. He can divide hearts. He can try to spread darkness over everything. But in the presence of this love, he has no power. Because when God manifests, darkness dissolves. Restoration begins. The one who was lost is called back. The one who was broken is restored by the Creator's hands. The one who thought they would never feel God's presence again is suddenly wrapped in a peace that words cannot describe. Unity is unbreakable because God never called anyone to walk alone. Even heaven itself is a community, the Father, the Son, the Holy Spirit. Since before creation, God is unity, and those who belong to Him were made to live in unity. That's why true love doesn't just defeat evil, it destroys it. It doesn't just restore what was broken, it creates something new. Because this love never fails. It never gives up. It never abandons. This is the love that Jesus demonstrated when He carried a cross that wasn't His. It's the love that bled, suffered, and died so that no one else would have to be a slave to darkness. And that same love is calling you now. This is the love that can transform any heart, no matter how far someone has gone, no matter how deep they've fallen, no matter how many chains bind them. No soul is beyond God's reach. None. Because in God's kingdom, the impossible does not exist. The story isn't over. The enemy wrote a story of destruction, but God has written another ending, and that ending is not destruction. It's not ruin. It's not eternal condemnation. The ending God has written is redemption, because no soul is lost forever. No fall is too deep for God's grace. No darkness is strong enough to resist the Creator's light. Light always defeats darkness, always. It may seem like some people have gone too far. It may seem like some situations can't be repaired. It may seem like life has been irreversibly destroyed. But the God who created the universe from nothing, the God who spoke light into existence with a single word, the God who parted the sea, the God who raised the dead, that same God can restore you, can restore your home, can restore your family, can restore your soul, because He has always specialized in bringing life to what was dead. Redemption is real. Redemption isn't some distant concept. It's not an empty promise. It's not an illusion. Redemption is real. Hope is tangible. Restoration is available right now. But one thing remains. You have to choose. Because God is always ready to rescue, but He never forces anyone. His love is powerful, but it's never imposed. He calls, he waits, he offers a way back, but the choice is yours. And maybe today is your last chance, because no one knows how much time they have left. No one knows how many days remain. No one knows when the final opportunity will pass, and when time runs out, there will only be two realities: eternity with God, or eternity without Him. And now, the question that echoes in your heart is, which one will be yours?